Got some pink on the paper. Actually, again, it's permanent alizarin crimson. And I love this color because it can do everything from really dark, bright red, and then watering it down to a beautiful pastel pink. So it has great value range. You can go the whole gamut, and you could actually make that even darker. Again, this little watercolor sketchbook, if you'll get one, and before you start to paint, play with your colors. In this case, we're going to make greens. We make them with blue and yellow. If you use green straight out of the tube, eventually you'll realize that it's not such a great idea. I have sap green on my palette, and that's just to mix with other colors. It makes a great base where you can darken it with some blues or lighten it with some orange or some yellow or even add red to deepen it. So it's a nice starting color, but as a rule you want to mix your greens and just kind of let it happen on the paper. It's much more interesting. So in this case, even some yellow. This is New Gamboge, and I'm going to pick up a little bit of Winsor Blue Red shade. It makes really great greens, and as a friend of mine once said, it's a blue that really wants to be green. And this is a good example of you need to give it time to blend. Up here I put the blue directly into the wet yellow. This is called wet into wet. Wet paint into wet paint. Also wet into wet water is called wet into wet. What we've done here is mostly wet on dry, wet paint on dry paper. These are terms that you'll hear from other teachers. But see how this has already changed into green as it gets down here? Still a little bit blue up here. You don't want to touch it. You let it finish doing its thing. And until it's totally dry, you really won't know how it's going to look. I love to paint late at night. I do have a rule, nothing after midnight. Everything I paint after midnight turns to mush, so clock strikes 12, I go to bed. But I can't wait to get up the next morning and go down and see what it looks like, because they change overnight, sometimes for the better. But already that blue and the yellow have made a nice green, different combinations of green. If this stays blue at the top, I don't worry about it. I let it dry, and I can come back after it does. This is not going to work quite as well because it's still wet, but a light layer of more yellow across gets it to where it needs to be. So before you play over here, play over here. But again, put in a blob of yellow and then try just a little bit of the blue. See what you get. Also, it's a good time to try it. Mix it up over here. When you mix it on the palette, you get a solid color. And although it's a pretty color, it's not going to be as interesting as what happens when you let it happen over here. You see all the colors. You see the yellow, the blue, and the green. Much more interesting, especially when you're painting something from nature. So to play with these colors, you could actually start painting with three primary colors. Red, blue, and yellow. And they're called primary colors because you can't get them by mixing other colors together. You can only start with those colors, which makes them the primary colors. But from those three, you can mix anything under the sun. You can make purples, yellows, oranges, browns, blacks, just really rich colors, very pastel colors. So just three basic ones, you're good to go. And if I had to choose three, it'd be cobalt blue, permanent alizarin crimson, and New Gamboge. And from that, you can branch out. My next two probably would be Winsor Blue Red shade and Burnt Sienna. And I could live with those. You can make just about everything. So get a sketchbook, start out. Here's Winsor Blue Red shade. It's quite blue. Just put a blob down and then blend it down. Add a little bit of water. See what happens when it's very light. So quite a range there. And even New Gamboge. Full strength. I don't use that very often. It's more of a taxi cab yellow, school bus yellow. But watered down, this gives you the most gorgeous, transparent, pale yellows. Yellows are funny. They don't layer too well over other colors as a rule. They look chalky or sit on top. Not this one. It does a wonderful job. If you make a very pastel version of it and you layer it on top of others, full strength, you get orange, bright orange. But watering that down over that pink, you can create a gorgeous glowing peach color. So you've got everything from this to this, same two colors, same combinations, different combinations. If you take these two and you mix them together on your palette, yeehaw! So play with your colors, get to know them, get to know the qualities, get to know the properties, what they do to each other and with each other. Even Winsor Blue Red shade and alizarin crimson. You can get mauves, you can get pretty violets. And these two, by layering, you get a different color altogether, a different effect. So play with these, get to know them, and then slowly add one or two other colors at a time. But you'll find out that a limited palette is much better than having every color under the sun. I have one student who loved to buy paints, and every time a flyer would come in the mail or email, she would go, "Oh, I need that collection." So she had palettes all over her studio. They were everywhere. And if you ask her what she was going to use to change this, well, I don't know. So get to know your paints, get to know what they do, what you can do with them. So it makes a difference. We're going to actually put some leaves on this rosebud. And I'm going to start with some really juicy New Gamboge. We're going to do this wet into wet. Let the paper do the work. How you hold the brush makes a difference. In this case, you want pretty much a fine line. So I'm going to chisel the edge, try to flatten that as much as possible. Hold your brush straight up. Lay it down. This needs to be shiny, which means wet, because we're going to drop that blue in. And if you don't know how much is on here, always get in the habit of tapping this, and that gets rid of that extra moisture. It limits the number of boo-boos. When you get to the end, you want to just pull this like a tendril. Then we're going to come and pick up some rich blue, not very watery, but pretty thick paint. Just drop it in down at the base, which is where it's going to be the darkest. And then you hold it up. Yeehaw! This is where you separate the hippies from the yuppies. The ones that were hippies back in the old days go, ooh, cool. And the others go, well, that's kind of interesting. If it all goes down there too much, hold it back up, let it run back down. Same thing over here. Again, if you don't let this part dry when you come back to put this color in, you'll have nice, interesting combinations of stuff. Not necessarily good, but interesting. Which brings up another point. If your teacher walks by and she stops at your work and she looks down and she goes, "Oh, isn't that interesting?" It's not necessarily a good thing. So again, I'm dropping the blue in. I'm going to hold it up. If you wait too long and the yellow dries, this won't work. If it's not wet and shiny, it won't work. The goal is to make that gradually dissipate as it gets out toward the end so that the tips stay pale green and yellow. Here it goes.